A gentleman called Anthony became the dog dad to a beautiful Labrador named Reggie, who proved to be quite the handful. This was one obstinate and miserable pooch, one who was struggling to adapt to his new normal. Everything seemed hopeless for his new owner. It seemed like everything that he tried was in vain. That was until he discovered some life-changing information. Just where had this dog come from, and what kind of troubles had he experienced? Anthony was informed by the shelter that Reggie would need a fortnight to settle into his new place, but it seemed like it would take far longer than that. Reggie could not be shouted at for his failure to nestle, and his sad face broke Anthony's heart every day. It seemed like the whole environment at large was proving too much for the miserable pooch to handle. Just when Anthony was on the verge of letting Reggie go, a letter came to him left by Reggie's last guardian. Anthony was also a stranger to this town, having moved just half a year past. This was a beautiful place, he quickly found, populated with friendly and compassionate folk. He was making new acquaintances quickly, but all the friends in the world could not fill that hole in his heart, one which he believed adopting an animal companion would fill. So, Anthony visited a local animal shelter where he came across a gorgeous black Labrador called Reggie. Anthony was happy that this was an ethical and loving shelter. Anthony had known of Reggie before visiting the shelter, having seen him displayed on the town's news. Several people had shown interest in the dog, but had ultimately passed him on as he proved to be a poor fit for their lifestyles. When Anthony walked in that fateful day, the shelter's staff must have recognized him as the ideal owner, what with how eager they were to pass Reggie on to him. They handed him Reggie's food bowl, dog bed, and toys, not to mention a note from Reggie's former dog parent. Anthony described how Reggie and I didn't hit it off when we got home. I guess I was expecting a super happy dog, one who would be excited to see me and who would want to play and cuddle more. I found it hard to adjust to the new town as well as a new dog. I was still lonely, and it seemed like Reggie wasn't happy either. I bought him new toys, but that didn't change anything. Reggie was quickly revealing himself to be a depressive animal. He seemed oblivious to any kind of natural dog training, failing to adhere to any of Anthony's commands except for the odd come or sit. Even calling him by his name inspired little reaction in Reggie. All that Anthony could hope for was the odd glance his way before Reggie returned to his slump. Anthony was beginning to think that perhaps he was a poor owner, but he could not be certain. Anthony talked about how he would reprimand Reggie when he chewed on the boxes he had yet to unpack, as well as his shoes, something which the dog seemed highly indignant about. The previously discussed adapting period had ended with no progress to speak of, and Anthony was convinced that Reggie needed to return. The sad Anthony reached for the note with the shelter's number on it among Reggie's possessions. As Anthony rummaged through Reggie's few possessions, something noteworthy came to light. Having replaced Reggie's old items with new ones, Anthony had completely forgotten about the dog's former possessions. It was when Reggie trotted in and rediscovered his old dog pad that a faint spark of excitement appeared. Reggie clearly had an emotional connection to these things, Anthony noticed, also spotting a sealed letter included in the bundle from Reggie's former dog parent. This was something he had brushed over. Anthony was desperate for some kind of guidance from this letter. He was surprised to see how lengthy it was after opening it. The letter began with a woeful account of how miserable the previous owner was to have to leave Reggie behind at the shelter. This was a heartfelt message, solely intended for the eyes of whoever Reggie's new owner, written following this person's final trip with their beloved Reggie. The letter carried on by describing how Reggie seemed to have realized that things had changed. They had gathered his possessions up and stored them against the back door prior to their final excursion. It was clear that Reggie could pick up what was in store for him. It was a heartbreaking story, but the owner also wanted Anthony to learn more about Reggie to better help the two bond better. It described how Reggie had a fond appreciation for tennis balls, which he adored collecting. Reggie was rarely spotted with no less than 2 tennis balls stuffed into his jaw and would consistently try to fit 3 in. Reggie could not help himself whenever tennis balls were thrown, going to great lengths to retrieve them, meaning that Anthony must be careful where he chucks them. Then there were instructions that Reggie was familiar with: heel, come, sit, and stay. Reggie had indeed been trained, as the letter would reveal, incredibly well, in fact. He also knew hand signals, meaning that he could be gestured to return and to jump over obstacles. A shake of a hand would cause him to shake his fur dry after getting wet, and could even high-five. Reggie was familiar with laying down, ball fetching and eating instructions, as well as when he was in for a juicy bone or a treat. Reggie had been reared with tasty treats. So why were commands so difficult for him to understand? The letter warned Anthony against Reggie's hatred for visits to the vet, and that Anthony would struggle to convince him to cooperate when it was time to get into the car. Like many dogs, Reggie had a sixth sense about vet visits. Anyone with the smallest understanding of animal behavior knows that they despise vets, but it was still a kind thought including this detail in the letter. Anthony would make sure to be careful. Then there was perhaps the most telling reason for Reggie's mournfulness included in the letter. This person had no partner, and Reggie was the closest thing to a life companion that he or she had. They had been inseparable, and the writer urged Anthony to include Reggie in as many of his daily activities as possible. Anthony then knew that they had enjoyed an inseparable connection. Still, Reggie was described as a people's pooch, but his previous owner had been his favorite person in the world. Anthony knew that the change would be incredibly difficult. For some reason, Reggie was not even his true name. I don't know what made me do it exactly, but when I dropped him off at the shelter, I just told him his name was Reggie. He's a clever dog. He'll get used to it and will respond eventually. But I couldn't bear to give them his real name. For me to do that, it would feel so final and binding that handing him over was admitting that I'd never see him again. Who was this dog? Anyone reading this letter would quickly realize that Reggie's previous owner was heartbroken to have to write it in the first place. It seemed like that this person could only entrust their best friend's name to his new owner. He or she was committed to helping Anthony with the new bonding process. This was going to be a hard time, they stated, but they had a final and essential detail to impart with Anthony. The letter was about to become interesting. The writer finally shared some of their personal relevant information. He was a tank driver for the U.S. Army, and he named his dog after his military vehicle. The soldier had provisionally put his dog into the shelter if his commander ordered his return to the battlefield. This soldier had no family to pass Tank on to. All that he asked of his commander was that he inform the shelter when he had been deployed, and that Tank could then be opened to adoption. How would the tank driver's fate pan out? There are few relationships as powerful as that which Tank and his previous owner shared. The letter was touching Anthony deeply as he continued reading, where the soldier justified how anyone could be so close to a dog. He did not want to upset anyone with this woeful tale, but it was important that the new owner knew how special this pet was. Tank was his family, and they had been together for 6 years, a period almost matching his army career. That unconditional love from a dog is what I will take with me to Iraq, as an inspiration to do something selfless, to protect innocent people from those who would do terrible things. Sometimes someone doesn't need to say a word to fill you with courage. If I had to give up Tank to do it, I'm glad to have done so. He was my example of service and love. I hope I honored him by my service to my country and comrades. The letter then started rounding off. The soldier announced that he was departing that evening and that he was about to leave this incredible letter at the shelter. He could not withstand another tearful departure from Tank. He had been devastated by the initial farewell, and he only wished to see Tank actually succeed in gobbling that third tennis ball. He wished Anthony all the best for his time with Tank and insisted that his new home be a happy place. He finished writing and signed his name, Paul Mallory. Anthony was then struck with inspiration. Paul Mallory's signed name had sparked something in Anthony, who, despite having just arrived in the town, knew of the soldier from the townsfolk's conversations. This was a local youth who had signed himself up for the war in Iraq. He had died a hero's death, sacrificing himself to ensure the lives of 3 brothers in arms. Mallory was awarded a Silver Star posthumously for bravery. Throughout the summer of his passing, the townsfolk had kept their flags at half-mast. Anthony was overcome with emotion, looking at Tank in a completely new light. When Anthony called the dog by his real name, he immediately brightened up. The new owner and dog bounded to each other enthusiastically. Anthony kept calling Reggie by his real name, and each time he did, Tank became happier and happier. They cuddled and played like best friends. That was when Tank finally managed to scoop up 3 tennis balls in his mouth. All of Anthony's fears were immediately washed away. Anthony felt terrible for having been hard on Tank, considering what a hard ride he had been through. There was no doubt in his mind that he would follow every one of Paul's heartfelt wishes for his best friend. "I can only hope and pray that you make him part of your family and that he will adapt and come to love you the same way he loved me," the fallen soldier implored. Anthony could have never guessed that this moody pooch had such a phenomenal history. While most people appreciate the struggles that soldiers endure, it is also important to consider those that they leave behind. Thankfully, there are groups that aid service people's dogs needing new homes. These include Dogs on Deployment and Guardian Angels for soldiers' pets. Those looking to adopt new dogs should strongly consider these organizations. You by now have some idea of how much it would mean to those who selflessly serve.